Richard Koo is the chief economist at Nomura Research Institute, the research arm of Nomura Securities. He joins us now from Tokyo. Richard, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us.
Quite welcome. Good morning to you.
Richard, in the US, it seems as if the usual macroeconomic policies have proven to be ineffective. So what micro policies might the Fed have to come up with now?
Well, there are two macro policies, monetary and fiscal, and I would argue the fiscal policy has been very effective. But as you know, the original fiscal program President Obama put in expires around now, and that's the reason I think we are seeing slower economic numbers from the United States. And so fiscal policy, I think, was working, but the monetary policy, for monetary policy to work, it has to increase money supply somehow, so the private sector has more money to spend. And somehow the market has kind of concluded themselves that with a large increase in Federal Reserve balance sheets, money supply must have increased, and then people are spending more money. That's where the inflation argument comes from. But when you actually look at what happened to U.S. money supply, or for the matter, UK money supply or European money supply, it hardly grew during the last 2 years, just a tiny bit. Nothing compared to what happened to the liquidity injected by the central banks in these parts of the world, which means that the usual mechanism of monetary easing, increasing money supply, has completely broken down. And it's broken down because, as I mentioned in earlier programs, so much of the private sector is now deleveraging. And if people are deleveraging, money supply cannot possibly increase. And I think that's the limitation of the monetary policy at this moment.
So what's the solution, Richard?
Well, the solution is not a politically easy one, and that is to increase government borrowing and spending. Because as government borrows and spends, money multiplier becomes positive again. You can actually increase money supply, which makes monetary policy work again. But politically in the US and the UK, everything is moving in the opposite direction. And so I guess Federal Reserve will have to do something second best, possibly trying to help the American banks with more capital and things like that, that's something that Bank of Japan did 2 years ago. But those are just a help at margin. I'm afraid they are not going to be the fundamental solutions for private sector deleveraging.
How much can the US, what lessons can the US learn from Japan over the last decade?
Well, it was summarized in, I think, Chairman Bernanke's comment that he is now more sympathetic to what Japan went through 10 years ago. Yeah. Because he was so critical about Bank of Japan not doing enough. Now, he did enough, but he realized that nothing happened. And when you look at the charts on what happened to money supply relative to what happened to liquidity injected by the central banks, you see the exact same pattern. The Japanese pattern 10 years ago and the U.S. pattern this time around, which means that we are suffering from the same disease. And I call this disease balance sheet recession, where private sector is minimizing debt with zero interest rates because of the balance sheet problems following the bursting of the bubble. Now, this is a very unusual situation. It doesn't happen very often. But when it happens, I'm afraid you have to put in fiscal stimulus, government borrowing and spending money to keep the bank's asset side of the balance sheets from shrinking, which will allow banks to increase money supply for the private sector to spend.
Okay, Richard, I wish we had more time, but thank you very much for joining us today. Richard Koo there from Nomura Research Institute. He's the chief economist there.